St. Joseph College Teaching Fellow Series. For the next 7 Thursday evenings, we will have an opportunity to become involved with many of the arts as we learn about them. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think it promises to be an interesting trip with some stimulating guides who will take you through some of the visual arts, the performing arts, and the literary arts. Next week, the very talented Wheatfield artist, Doris Myers, who is in the back there, will take you through clay as art. Clay remains a popular medium for artistic expression today as it has for probably 100 years. Doris probably knows a lot more about that than I do. I hope she does. Tonight you will see a few examples, but really next week's when you'll learn about clay as art. The following week, Bill Oates will talk about and show you silent films, and knowing Bill as I do, I know it will be a most entertaining and interesting evening, as well as probably lead you to a much greater appreciation of filmmaking as art. The following week, Bonnie Zimmer will take you on a fascinating journey through some of the stranger visual art forms, how they came to be, and what are the keys to appreciating them as art. And a special treat has been added for that night, which Jim doesn't even know about yet. Up in the Lily Impending Gallery on the main floor of this building, that night we will have Hilary Eddy, The Magic of Vision. Hilary is a oil painter from Lafayette who is very well known around the state and also has exhibited nationally in New York and San Francisco and other places. She will be here, and the second half of Bonnie Zimmer's presentation will involve Hilary Eddy taking you through her exhibition. And that should really be interesting. On September 26th, the popular Hal Gray, who is also here, will draw on his lifetime experience with music and take you through an evening about music, with music. Is that right, Hal?
That's close enough.
Okay. The following week we will delve into the theater with Rensselaer artist, architect, and theater buff Frank Fisher. And the session will end with Kentland's John Yost digging deeper into the life and humor of George Ade. George Ade, as many of you know, is a very interesting character apart from his literary and dramatic skills. And Yost is historian of the George Ade Memorial Association and is well steeped in both aspects of Ade history. So that's what we have to look forward to over the next 7 weeks. One of the little-known but truly great private collectors of American art is author James Michener and his wife. And it is his view that a person who is fortunate in one art is obligated to know the other arts and should plow back his good fortune into the total art world. Being very susceptible to visual images, he plunged into the heart of American painting, amassed a very great collection of American painting, which he donated to the University of Texas, and it is now occupies a whole gallery at the University of Texas, a whole building, I think. But even if you're like me, not any kind of an artist, I think you and I know, will appreciate these entertaining sessions. And who knows, maybe we'll discover some hidden talent or interest in ourselves in one of the arts we hadn't even thought about. We are really kind of fortunate in this relatively small rural area to have excellent access to the arts. All we really have to do is use our information sources and look around us. In Indiana, the Indiana Arts Commission oversees the granting of state funds for the arts, whether for the Indianapolis Symphony or for the Prairie Arts Council. The state has an active group of local arts agencies, theater companies, local area museums, and performing arts centers, and a rich tradition in both the visual and literary arts. A look through the magazine Arts Indiana will give you all the details of what's going on in the state at any given time. Indiana has an outstanding symphony orchestra, the Indianapolis Symphony, and several excellent symphonies throughout the state. Here in Rensselaer, we have easy access to the Lafayette Symphony, the Northwest Indiana Symphony, that recently performed at St. Joseph's College and at the Kentland Fair during this year. And Indianapolis and Chicago are really not that far for museums and theater and music. Also in Lafayette, Purdue has its galleries and continuing performing arts series. There is the Lafayette Museum of Art and the Tippecanoe Arts Federation. The Civic Center and a wide range of performing arts ranging from the blues at the Knickerbocker Tavern and jazz at the Depot to the Bach Chorale. In the other direction, in Merrillville, there's a Star Theater. In Chesterton, several art galleries, including a new, very nice gallery at Valparaiso University. Getting even closer to home in Jasper County, we have many talented local artists and arts collectors. We have the Newton County Band, the Kankakee Valley Community Chorus, the Jasper County Art League, St. Joseph's College Fine Arts Programs, and the Columbian Players, the KV Theater Company, arts exhibitions and performances at the local libraries, the local school system art programs, and in this building, the Carnegie Players, the Carnegie Quilters, the Classic Theater Company, and the Prairie Arts Council. The Prairie Arts Council has the Lily Impending Gallery, which we try to fill 7 or 12 months with free exhibitions. And I might mention right now that still in that gallery is Father Stang from St. Joseph's College exhibition of African art. It is an absolutely spectacular collection that he's amassed over 20 years. And during the break, we'll open it up and you will have the opportunity to go up and look at it during the break, and then after we're finished this evening at 9 o'clock, you can go up and spend as much time up there if you want. It's coming down tomorrow, but we'll open it up tonight so you can see it if you want. In addition, the Prairie Arts Council, with the help of the Indiana Arts Commission and local businesses, and frequently in collaboration with other organizations, we present or sponsor performances, concerts, workshops in the arts for people of all ages and all skill levels. So there are lots of opportunities to participate and learn about the arts. There's no need to be bashful. You just do it. It's all around you. For those of us who don't have the ability, discipline, or talent to be artists, there's always collecting. Anyone can collect, and many do, collecting everything from salt shakers to sports cards to antique furniture to art. Collecting art is a very old and, I have discovered, somewhat complex pastime. How does one know what to collect? Where do you find art to collect? How much to pay for it? What do I do with it? Even to the extent of what is art and what isn't art. We're going to confine ourselves this evening mostly to collecting the visual arts. When most people hear the word art, they think of something to hang on the wall. But the range is really much broader, including paintings, prints, sculptures, ceramics, glass, woodworking. There's also functional art like silverware and pottery, and wearable art, jewelry, and hand-painted clothing. Maybe art is also the rock music poster and the travel poster. Art can be described as anything that speaks to you or makes you react. It may also tell you something about yourselves. Let's start out with a distinction between the rock poster, some of which I happen to really like, and what we call fine art. It is a distinction between mass-produced art, objects, and other works done by hand by an artist. The rock poster was produced by a photolithograph offset on a printing press. A painting is done, or a print is done by hand by the artist. We can think about art buyers in 4 categories. And I'd like to just stop here for a minute. If any of you have any questions, as far as I'm concerned, raise your hand, break in, and ask at any time. And I hope that goes for my co-presenters also. So why would people want to buy art? Some people buy it as what we call wall fillers or wall hangers. People who buy art to fill a blank space on a wall. And there are decorators who want to want art that matches the wallpaper, upholstery, or the carpet. Investors whose interest is in collecting art pieces that will appreciate in value. If you're going to get into it for investing, you really better know what you're doing. You better learn a lot about it, and you better use what Father Stanning calls a purely intellectual, rational approach. In other words, if you're going to get into it for investing, don't buy art on emotion. You just can't buy something because you like it and expect it to appreciate in value, which is what the collectors, the investor collectors do. And then the final category is art lovers who collect for the sake of the art. They don't care if it doesn't match the sofa, and whether it will appreciate in value isn't a major consideration. Of course, it's nice if it does. They want to keep their collection and enjoy it. And I guess I'm in the last category because I know I don't fit in any of the other three. Basically, my current main interest is in paintings, prints, and pottery. And I say main because I do find other things that I like, and I buy them if I can afford it. And I say current because as I learn more, as I get deeper into some of the subjects that I'm interested in, I find that my interests change. That doesn't necessarily mean that the things I have now I won't enjoy anymore, I'll get rid of. I don't think I'll do that at all. I think I will continue to enjoy them. I might just quit collecting them. So where do you learn about fine art, and where can you find it to buy? I'm going to lump these two things together because they at least are partially the same. Obviously, you can learn about art from books at the library, and from videos, from museum lectures and workshops. But you can also learn about art at museums, galleries, antique shops, and shows, and at art fairs. And you can buy art at most of these as well. I favor books and videos and art fairs for learning, and antique shows, galleries, and art fairs for buying. I think there are three places where you need to be very careful about buying. One is auctions, another is antique shows, and another is what I would call art sales. These are clearly let the buyer beware places. If you are looking for fine art, and remember how I define fine art as something that the artist has done hands-on, be particularly wary of art sales, as they may be advertised at a local motel. The art found there is generally what I call factory art and repainted copies, although it most likely will be advertised as original art. If what you are looking for is an inexpensive wall hanger, then maybe that's where you'll find it. I personally never tire of galleries and art fairs, even though you'll see many of the same artists and often many of the same pieces of art. There are really 5 good art fairs within easy driving distance of Rensselaer, and they always have food and sometimes entertainment, which makes for a really nice day. The artist exhibition and art fairs are usually carefully juried, which ensures the buyer of quality original art. Now, what you're getting at art fairs is new art. You're not getting old masters or old paintings. The only place you're going to find those is at galleries and antique sale or shows, basically. The art fairs in this area are at Crete, Illinois. Balmoral Racetrack actually is where it is. They have an inside fair in March. Lafayette has art around the fountain in May. Chesterton has a big fair, 138, I think, artists this last time in early August. Michigan City has one in August. And then next week, Saturday, is Penrod in Indianapolis, and there's probably 250 artists there. I go each year to Lafayette, Chesterton, and Penrod. Chesterton this year, as I mentioned, had 138 artists exhibiting in 13 basic categories. There were 42 artists in painting or drawing, 19 in clay or pottery, 15 sculpture, 14 in jewelry, 10 in photography, 8 in prints, 8 glass artists, and so on. The artists at an art fair, the artists are always there, and if they're not in the middle of a sale, trying to make a sale to somebody, they're more than happy to talk to you about their art and answer any kinds of questions. The exhibitions here in the Carnegie Center, in the Lilly Impending Gallery, almost always have several items for sale, as they do at the galleries at the Wells Center in Lafayette. Private galleries, such as you'll find in Indianapolis, or sometimes in a shopping center, are in the business of selling their artists' work. Now, how to decide what to buy. Father Stang, the collector of the African artifacts upstairs, draws a distinction between emotional and an intellectual basis for determining what to buy. His booklet, which you can see up there, describes his collections, also contains a 10-page discussion of collecting. While it is specifically aimed at African art, the concepts he discusses apply to any art. He says to look at a piece, then walk away from it. Even if you think you really like it, come back later, and if you think you really like it, if the strong feeling is still there, then the piece has what he calls staying power for you. This is the emotional basis for buying art. The problem with this, particularly at art fairs, I've often left an art fair, returned home, and begin thinking about a piece I didn't buy, either because I wasn't sure or because my rational intellectual approach said it was too much money. Then, unfortunately, wished, usually for days after, that I'd bought it. Sometimes I can track that piece down even later on at another art fair. Father Stang also talks about timing in buying art. His advice, which I strongly support, is be patient, take your time. Michener, for example, studied everything he could find for a year and a half at a time when he wasn't even writing before making his first purchase. I've been at this little collecting that I do for 5 or 6 years, and I'm still very uncertain about what to buy. I'm scared to death when I go to an auction or when I go to an antique show about paintings. I just don't feel I know enough about them to make a purchase. Pottery is much easier, and I'm getting to the point where I'm a little comfortable with buying pottery, particularly at antique shows. Michener, for example, started out with Japanese prints and amassed a big collection of Japanese prints before changing his mind and concentrating on American contemporary art. Now what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the items that I have brought along. I'll start out with pottery, and I'll show you examples and talk a little bit about each one. I've basically got what I'll call 2 different kinds of pottery. One is art pottery, and this is an example of the kind of books that you can find. This is the Bible on art pottery. Now, art pottery was, I guess the term applies to pottery that was originally started in the late 1890s. And I don't know how many potteries there are listed in this book. I've never actually counted them, but I'm going to guess there are probably 120 potteries. These are companies, businesses, that set about to make art pottery. They established themselves near a source of clay, because that's what they had to have to make their pottery. They hired potters who were craftsmen, and they hired artists. And the 2 of them collaborated together to make what we call art pottery. It was part of what's known as the arts and crafts movement that started in the 1890s as a reaction to the Victorian decor that was popular at that time, and continued through, say, the late 1920s. These potteries, most of them went out of business in the Depression or before. There are maybe 1 or 2 out of that 120 I estimated that are still functioning. So, if you're looking for art pottery, where you're going to find it is antique shows and auctions and sales and that sort of place. This is a piece of art pottery. This is from the Nilo pottery. This different colors and swirls of different colored clay is kind of their trademark. They're the only ones that did that. I've got a couple other pieces of art pottery. That's a piece of art pottery. This is from Rookwood, which was a Cincinnati pottery. And Rookwood has a code on the bottom that you can tell the date. This is about 1910. I have no idea what this would be, but it's about the
Would you
same.
put them on the shelf?
Okay.
Thank you.
So those are two pieces of art pottery. Basically, the kind of art pottery that you, and I'll open this up to one of these pages where you can really, well, you can see one here. The only place you're going to find something like this today is in a private collection or in a museum. And that piece right there would probably run, depending on how big it is, which you can't tell here, $7,000 or $8,000. This one, I think I paid $45 for, and this one, I don't remember what it was. It was probably over $100. But the really expensive art pottery that you're going to find in a museum is hand painted and hand decorated like this is. Actually, the way these were created, Rookwood particularly had several standard, what they called standard sizes, so that this would be a standard piece, and then the artist would come in and do the design. This is a very simple design, but the potter, they may have had 10 potters making this particular vase, and then an artist would come in and do this. The really good ones are signed on the bottom. In addition to having the Rookwood stamp, they're signed by the artist who did the decoration. Now, the other kind of pottery that I have, that I collect, that I want to show you, is what I call studio art pottery. And that's the kind that you buy today, the current thing. I have no idea how long ago you started buying what I call studio art pottery. I don't know why. I mean, I'm sure there's got to be some around that was developed a long time ago. But this is what I buy at art fairs. This is what I call studio art pottery. And I brought a couple of pieces. This is a piece of porcelain. Now, as Doris knows, but much better than I do, pottery comes in basically 4 kinds. It's either stoneware, it's earthenware, or it's porcelain. And Raccoon, which is I believe, Doris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's earthenware that's fired in a different way.
Actually, it's stoneware with a lot of grog in it, so it can stand the
Okay,
shot.
good. Yeah, okay, so it's stoneware. This is a piece of Raccoon that was done by a potter by the name of Mike DeBikey. He's from Indianapolis. You can find this at all art fairs in the area because he appears at all of them. One thing, we've got 2 or 3 of Mike DeBikey's pieces. One thing I like about Mike DeBikey is that his prices are going up every year, which I think means that he's in demand more. This was by Una Mertz is her name. She's a potter from Cincinnati, and I bought this at Penrod last year. I'm going back to Penrod, and I hope to see her because I want to see if I can get another one of these. I really like her work. I want to show you one more piece of pottery from my collection. This is probably the most expensive piece of pottery I have. This was made by my son when he was in college. It's Raccoon. But we have several pieces that he made that kind of just blend in with all of the other pieces that we have. So, that's about all I have to say about my pottery. Anybody have any questions about that? Bev has got some pottery as well, and I know she's going to talk about. So,
Bob,
yeah,
I might add it.
you be nice to me.
I will extend this information about Raccoon when I talk next week and
Good.
have some slides and things.
Wonderful. Yeah, I thought she would. I was hoping she would. Because I know that's Raccoon and I know that's Raccoon, but
Did you get the covered vessel in the Chesterton Fair?
this one?
Uh-huh.
No, I think I got that at, around the Fountain of Lafayette.
It's a wonderful product.
Yeah.
Love Raccoon.
But he's pricing himself right out of my market as far as I'm concerned. It's nice, I'm glad I've got some things of his, but he's getting to be a little bit too much. Now, the other thing that I collect are paintings and prints. And I want to show you, some prints particularly. I want to show you some things that are original art, that are fine art, and I'm going to show you some things that are not. And I'm not sure where I want to start, but I guess I'm going to start right here. That's pretty spectacular, isn't it? This ain't art, folks. And I'll show you.
Excuse me,
mine.
Bob, you want to turn some of those things so the video will pick them up too? Then
Oh,
we'll,
okay.
Put that up.
How's that? Okay. I wish I could keep these up at the same. Bev, can you want?
Some help?
Yeah. You hold that up.
Do we have an easel upstairs?
No, that's okay, because I gotta move them down. This is a print, but not an art print. It's just a print. It's one of these rock poster kind of prints of a very famous painting by Rembrandt. It's of his son. He currently resides in, I believe, the Northern Simon Museum in Los Angeles. And when I visited several years ago and saw this painting, the original, it is absolutely spectacular. But just by coincidence, they gave everybody who was in the museum that day one of these. And then I found this. This is supposed to be the same as this. Now, looking at it, you can tell it ain't even close, folks. But what this is a wall hanger. This is somebody has hired an artist somewhere to repaint probably from a photograph or a print this piece of work, and then they print it. This is just on a board here. It's printed on a board. It's not an original or anything. And the thing that was so striking to me is this is an actual reproduction. I mean, this is what the original painting looks like, and this is supposed to be it, but it's not, as you can see.
How do they do prints?
Well, I was afraid somebody asked that question.
I kind of know.
There are about as many different ways of doing prints as there are artists. I'm going to show you a couple more things. Can we just put that question on hold and remember it? And we'll try to get through it. This is a print. This is an art print. It is signed by the artist. The artist's name is Betty Graham. And it's numbered down here, 25 of 50. That means that this is actually a linoleum cut, which means she took a piece of linoleum and with a knife she cut in this design. And probably because there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 colors in here. She did it 5 times. And then she ran with those colored inks. And she made 50 prints. This was the 25th impression from her process. But this, because it's signed and it's numbered, and because the artist did it, that's considered an art print. This is another print. Now this is more like the travel poster or the rock poster. This is not an art print. We like it a lot because we have some connection with the subject matter here, not the mermaids, but the building, basically. The artist that did this, his name is Raccoon, and all of his paintings have mermaids in it someplace. He lived on Cape Cod, and he worked out there. He died probably in 1985 or so. But the reason we have this is because we visited in that building several times, and we know the area. The original of this would probably sell for $10,000-$20,000 on Cape Cod because he's so well known. I paid, I think, $8 for this. But that's not fine art. It's just a nice print. Now these are very special to me. These are woodcuts by Lillian Fendick. And these are all originals that she did. This is what the blocks look like. She actually cut the wood out with a woodworking tool, and then she inked them and made the impressions. She has signed each one of these. Ralph was nice enough to bring these down. I had one with me anyway, but she did 13 of the small ones, which she sent, I think, to her friends at Christmas time. And she did one big one. I guess 12 small ones and one big one. Isn't that right, Ralph? Yeah. This being the big one, it's a philodendron. So this to me is fine art. This was done by the artist, and it was done from these blocks. If anybody would like to see these blocks, why, you can take a look at them at the break or whenever. I just make sure that they stay there. Okay, this is also a print. This is what's called an intaglio print. And I am not real sure exactly how that process works. It is reverse of what this is, which is, on this one, the raised parts of the block come out white or dark, and the recessed ones come out light. Well, it's actually the reverse on an intaglio. And they can do an intaglio on copper, they can do it on brass, they can do it on any kind of metal, or I think they can also do it on wood. But he has, the artist that did this, has one of these, an original block, for every different color in here. I don't have any idea, maybe 7, 6, somewhere in that nature. And he made that many different impressions. This is signed by the artist, Michael Smith. It's number 43 of 68 prints that he made. So this is a fine art print. Those are the last prints I have. These are a couple of paintings that I brought. These are Lillian Fendick's watercolors. This is a very early watercolor. She came here in the late 40s. This was done in 1948. It is of Breezy Creek in Nashville, Indiana, in Brown County. You can tell, looking at this and looking at that, how her style, this was done in the 60s, how her style changed in that 20-year period. You see here large blocks of color, whereas this, the color and the detail is much finer. I like both of them, but her style changed a great deal over that 20-year period, and her later work is much more like this one. This was a farm out on a deserted farm, obviously, out on what's your road, 950? 1080. Yeah, 1080. It's right across from Curtis Creek. Yeah. So basically, that's the extent of what I brought to show you. If anybody has any questions about any of that or anything, why, feel free to ask me now or later. If not, what do we got, Jim? About 10 minutes before a break, or 5 minutes, or what?
Either way, we could take a break now if you thought this was a good time, and we will take only a 10-minute break. We'll be try to be very strict.
Bev,
about that.
would you rather take the break now?
That's fine, probably easier than breaking up
Okay.
what I'm doing.
I have two co-presenters tonight, amateur collectors like me. And remember, if you have questions, don't be bashful about asking them. Just be nice about it. That's all, because we are amateurs. The first one, Larry Kasanovich will be the last one, and Bev Randall will follow me. I don't have any idea what Bev's going to talk about. I'm sure it is.
Thank you, Bob. Can everyone hear me?
No, we're going to turn this off.
Okay.
No. Just talk louder, will you, Ben?
I'll move to the center first. Can you hear me better now?
Thank you.
Get off my knees. That will help.
It'll help the sound, but not the feel.
I know. I know. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about how I got started collecting. First of all, I'm what I would call a very unsophisticated, pretty uneducated collector of art. And I really never considered myself a collector until sometime recently. I guess it was about 3 years ago when we formed the board for the Prairie Arts Council. I was asked to come to a meeting a group of people were getting together to begin what is now the Prairie Arts Council, and I said, sure, I'll be there. And actually, no, I guess someone really kind of twisted my arm. I said, okay, I'll come, because I was awfully busy. And we all went around the table saying who we were, because we didn't all know each other, and why we were there, what was our interest in art. And I wasn't an artist, and I wasn't an art educator, and all I could say was, well, I guess I collect art. And it sounded a little stuffy, and I think art collecting is sort of stuffy. I mean, it sort of has that reputation, but you don't have to be some stuffy person to collect art, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it either. That's my approach. And when I say it's unsophisticated, I sort of learned about art, kind of by osmosis, really. I've been collecting for about at least 25 or more years. And the reason I started was that I lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I happened to be enmeshed in a very arty group of friends and acquaintances. And most of the people I knew well were either artists themselves or interior designers or architects or people in those fields. And so I was exposed to a lot because they exposed me to a lot and they taught me a lot. And so I kind of learned a sense of color and design and some of those things really just by associating with them and learning and questioning and that sort of thing. When I started collecting 25 years ago, I didn't have much money to spend, and so I started buying what was really most affordable, which was pottery. Pottery is still very affordable. I mean, there's obviously some very expensive kinds of pottery out there and some very famous potters. But you can find really wonderful things that you like at, as Bob said earlier, art fairs, even in galleries. There's pottery that's very affordable. Art exhibits from at an artist studio. You know who the artist is. Go to their studio, buy directly from the artist. And most of what I've collected, I've tried to buy from the artist, herself or himself. Often doggedly pursuing this person to wherever their studio is to really see what they have for selection, and then buy directly from them when I've maybe seen their work in a gallery somewhere and chose not to buy it in the gallery. So that's how I got started. I don't have any degrees in art. I've taken one art course in my life, and it's really been fun. It's really something I do for enjoyment. I'd like to make a few points as I talk about things and give you a little more background on what collecting can mean to you. What do I do with this? Believe it or not, what I brought today, I brought some prints and paintings and things in addition. This is just a teeny little section of the pottery I have at home. I display literally everything. And I don't think my home is junky. I haven't gotten to that point, but I'm so fond of the things I've bought, and a lot of them have pieces have very personal meaning that I want them around me. So they're in all the rooms of my home. I think tastefully displayed. I don't have walls and walls of things, but it's important to me if I'm going to have these things and I'm going to buy them to have them around me. And some of them are purely to look at on the wall or on a shelf, and some are very functional that I use in the kitchen. And so I'll talk about that too. I'd like to comment a little bit on framing, and I'll do that when we're talking about prints, paintings, that sort of thing. I think I'll just start by showing you some pottery and talking about it. Down at this end is a piece of Raccoon. This is the only piece I own, and I never thought I'd buy a piece of this kind of pottery because it's not my favorite thing. A lot of Raccoon, and if you've ever been to art fairs and looked at Raccoon pottery, ends up being metallic or iridescent looking. A lot of colors on the glaze. It's a very different looking pot. Raccoon pottery originated in Japan, and Raccoon pots were used for tea ceremonies. The process used to make this by those people centuries ago is somewhat different. Today's Raccoon artists do some interesting things with the way they fire their pots, and a lot of them use different kinds of techniques. I was at the Chesterton Art Fair this summer, and that's not where I bought this, but I was talking with a fellow who had a lot of Raccoon pots there. I think this is really interesting because of the way it has an opening, and this particular artist has laced metal and beads around the opening. This artist was telling me how he fires his pots and then he removes them from the kiln and sets them in a pile of newspapers, sets the papers on fire, and the pot is set on fire, and this reduction process takes place, and he said, I never know what I'm going to get, and I suppose that's true. I don't know, you can correct me, Doris. When you do Raccoon,
Just like Christmas.
you don't, it's a surprise. Every pot is a surprise. You simply cannot plan the look of your Raccoon. So, and sometimes they immerse this very hot pot in ice water and get a glazed effect, or crackled effect, I guess is what I should say. So they intentionally create an effect where there are all kinds of cracks in the pot, which is interesting. This would be something very functional. This I just threw in for the heck of it. This is called Monroe salt glazed pottery. I buy this in Maine, and I'm so cheap I buy the seconds. I don't even buy the real stuff. It's too expensive, I think. But there are outlet stores where you can buy this. But this is mostly all functional pottery. Plates, platters, bowls, that sort of thing. The interesting thing about salt glazed pottery is that at some point when it's fired, they throw salt, I guess, into the kiln. They just throw it on the pieces, and it creates these white kind of lumpy dots you'll see around here. And every piece is very different, but that's what that's all about. These are in my kitchen cupboard. I use them all the time, and I bought a set of these to serve desserts on or salads, and I have a set of these small dishes, and I've been to Maine several times, and I always try to pick up something new when I go there. I have several vases, several of them. It's a favorite shape design for me, and when I look, why buy something like this? My uneducated eye looks at the color of the glaze and the design and the shape of the pot or vessel, whatever you might call it, and I buy it because I like the way it looks. That's it. I would never sell any of what I have. I do not buy anything as an investment. I don't care what it's worth. It's just important to me because I like the way it looks. I have several pieces that are glazes that are sort of this bluish green. I have an awful lot of this color, and I've always been attracted to it. These are probably, I don't know, I bet I bought these 15, 20 years ago, simply because I like the design and the color. This is another set of, here again, the color, and you'll see a lot of repeated colors. A set of 3 bowls of powder made that I just love. And these are in my kitchen, and I use them all the time. Tupperware. This vase is made by a fellow who has a studio in Battleground, I believe it is. This was a gift to me from my husband. So I have not been to a studio. His last name is Frankenberger.
Scott Frankenberg.
Scott Frankenberg.
Wonderful porcelain.
Yes. And this is really interesting. Take a close look at it. You can when you come up here. I have a dish of his, a small dish, probably about 8 inches in diameter. And then I think 1 or 2 of these coffee mugs. So every time we drink coffee at home, we're often drinking someone's handwork, out of someone's handwork. So we get to see it all the time. This is a porcelain vase made by a fellow who's from Rockport, Maine. And he's an interesting guy. We saw some of his work in a shop in Portland, Maine, and were fascinated by it and found out that his studio was in Rockport. So we drove to Rockport and pulled into the parking lot of his studio, and he was just about ready to fire up a whole set of pots, vessels, whatever. And so he built the kiln himself. He was so excited about it. He wanted to bring us in. And this is the wonderful part about collecting. You meet fabulous, interesting people who know so many things and who can educate you. And so he wanted us to come in. He wanted to explain things and showed us around the studio. And he had a whole pile of bowls set in the corner, just kind of on a trash can. And I said, gosh, what are you doing with those? He said, I'm throwing them all away. And I said, what do you mean you're throwing them away? And I mean, these were bowls that he was normally selling for $60, $70. Nice, gorgeous bowls. Well, he said they're imperfect. And I said, oh, you don't sell things? Oh, no, I wouldn't consider selling it. I can't stand it. He said, I destroy all my imperfections. And he said, take one. I said, oh, no, I couldn't. He said, yes, take one. So I did. So I have one of his imperfect bowls. This is a bowl which I am just crazy about because of the color and the shape. And what's interesting about it is this nice matte glaze on the outside with a dark blue shinier design, and then inside is the dark blue glaze repeated. A fellow named Bauman from Warsaw, Indiana made this. I think I bought that at the Lafayette around the fountain art fair. I have a number of jars like this, or covered vessels, if you will, just because I like the way they look, because I like the shape of them. Many of them have lids. This one, I was sort of in my pink phase. I think I probably bought this in about 1980, between 1980 and 1985, in my rose phase. Michael Hill, a fellow who lives in Rock Rapids, Iowa, made this. And this is a candle holder that kind of ties in with this whole series of colors, a little earthier around the base and kind of brown tones, but it's designed for a fairly large candle, and I just think it's great looking. You rarely find a candle holder that tall holding a larger candle like that. And this is an interesting piece. This is made by a woman who lives in the Chicago area named, I think, Mary Ann Hammett. And if you come up later and look around, you can read this article that I happened to find in the Chicago Tribune sometime after I bought this. I had this at home, loved the look of it, saw this article and thought, it has to be the same artist, and it was. I think I bought this at the Old Town Art Fair in Chicago about 5 or 6 years ago. And what she did was, she was making what she thought was pretty ordinary blue and white porcelain bowls, and she got sick of it. And so she one day decided to create something that looks sort of like Mosaic Tile. And what she did was take, I think, an Indonesian, if you allow me to read this, an Indonesian batik technique of resist dye. And what she does is glaze her pieces with thousands of hand-applied dots. Sometimes it takes days to apply all the dots to this in shades of blue and rose and purple, and this one has green in it. And then it turns out looking like this, which is interesting. Okay. I'll move on to things I would put on the wall. These are in frame because this is very new. I bought this at Chesterton this summer. I bought this as a gift for someone last year, and she liked it. It's Connie Kingman's daughter. She liked it so well, and I liked it so well after I got it, I decided I had to find another one, and the artist was back there this year, and so I bought this one. This is an engraving. An engraving is one of the intaglio processes that Bob was talking about earlier. And this is something this artist would do by, in fact, this is wonderful. She puts a description on the back, which helps. She starts with a copper plate, and she incises the copper plate with this design. And you can see when you look closely at these, and this one happens to be named and numbered, and she has signed it, that there's kind of sort of a ridge along the whole outline of this, which tells me that this is authentic. I also trust this artist, and this is a statement of authenticity on the back, but that's something to look for, like that. We're talking about prints. This is one of the fancier things I have. This is a lithograph. You'll notice have. But I was attracted to this just because it sort of looks like someone's backyard, the way you look across the fence at a backyard, and it just looks serene and peaceful. And this came from a gallery in Chicago. And just to give you an example, I rarely would buy anything in a gallery. This was a gift from my husband. But this comes with a certificate of authenticity. So if you buy from a gallery, you should expect some things like this. This includes a nice profile of the artist, Robert Kipnis. And something called a print documentation that tells me that he did 120 of these impressions that are signed and numbered, and there were 15 artist proofs. Artist proofs are taken before they would do a limited edition like this. And then it says here that the plate this lithograph was done on was destroyed. So you know about the authenticity. A lithograph, I had to do a little reading and research myself. Again, I'm an amateur. But a lithograph, the word lithograph comes from a Greek origin, litho, stone, and graph, to write, or graphing. That's the correct pronunciation, to write. When a lithograph is produced, a stone plate is often used. Most of the time, I believe it's stone. You could use other material. And the artist draws the work with some sort of greasy crayon, is the best way I could say it. And then the process is a bit more complicated than I'm describing to you, but at any rate, it's inked, and then the prints are pulled off of the plate. So, lithographs, a little bit of information about that, originated in 1798 in Europe. And the interest in them today really took on a lot more importance after 1940 or so. In America, Americans didn't necessarily easily take to certain types of artwork. For instance, as you can imagine, oil paintings were always considered very important pieces of art. And a lithograph is considered, I believe, a graphic art. So maybe the real snobby people in the art world that weren't so quick to consider a lithograph as important a piece as an oil painting would have been. I brought this just for the heck of it to show you art can be very inexpensive. This is a greeting card someone gave me, and it has a small piece of Peacock on it. And it's signed, and I loved it. I wouldn't think of throwing it away, and why put it in a drawer? And so I had it framed. And it's one of my favorite little things. So keep in mind, if you ever get a wonderful greeting card that's handmade, you can preserve it and do something with it. This is Doris Myers watercolor. This was a gift to me by my husband, from my husband, and I think I had already raved about it. He saw me drooling over it in her studio in Wheatfield, and got it one Christmas. This is a real prize that hangs in a special place in the room we sit in all the time. And I think it's pretty important to Doris, too. She's borrowed it twice, for instance. So it gets to travel. It's a well-traveled piece. but it was framed this way, and which I love. It's a very nice framing. I love the color of the mat. I'm fond of flowers. That influences some of the things I buy.
Miss, the picture just before that, you said you had a frame. Where do you go for your frames?
Well, that's kind of a challenge. A lot of what I have is old and wasn't framed here in Indiana at all. I don't have a favorite place right now. I have used a place in Valparaiso a little. I used to have Ed Hudson frame things for me when he was here. That's a challenge.
There's one in Monticello, and there are 3 in Lafayette.
There's one in Crown Point, Wolfingers at Crown Point, is framed.
Yeah. I'm pretty particular about the way things are framed, and you ought to be careful. I mean, if you have several things and you just want to go get them framed somewhere, go through the whole process with the person who's doing the framing. I mean, unless you just trust them to just set something down and say, well, find a mat, pick a good color, find a nice frame, and I'll pick it up next week. Most people, I don't think, like to do that. I really don't. I'm much more choosy about the frame, and while we're talking about that, I'll just say a few things about framing. I read in a book about collecting art that the first duty of the frame is to the picture. And what that means to me is that what's important is the piece of art you bought, not some fancy scrollwork, wood, or real ornate frame you put on. Now, everybody's got different tastes and everyone's an individual, but if you put something on, put something in a very ornate frame, depending on what the work of art is, you could lose that inside the frame. And that gets to be a mistake, I think. And so I have sort of a purist attitude when it comes to framing, maybe a minimalist attitude. I don't happen to personally favor real elaborate frames because I want to see that image that I bought, not the wood around it or the metal around it or whatever. You ought to plan on sometimes paying more for your framing than you do for your piece of art. And to get a good framing done, that very often will happen. So that's not uncommon to expect that.
There's a fellow that framed that is Russ Nelson Art and Frames in Valpo. That might
Yes.
be used. And he supplies, I forget, they go 3 days a week all through Indiana supplying framers. So probably you should get a framing job and cheaper than you could perhaps Monticello.
I have had some things framed there on Doris's recommendation, I must say, and the framing costs were, I found, inexpensive.
Did you have to guide him through that?
Yes, I did, yes. I have a couple of pieces of photography. You really need to see this up close to appreciate it. This is a photograph, almost could be a painting, of a rural scene. It's called High Plains Morning. This was taken in 1989, probably in South Dakota. The artist photographer is a very good personal friend of mine. Her work is primarily in landscapes and a lot of landscape, I guess. I'll just leave it at that. But this was a wedding gift to me in 1989, to me and my husband. And I think she selected this because it represented South Dakota, which was where I had lived for about 22 years. So that has a lot of meaning to me. This is a very different photograph, which I haven't gotten framed yet. I can't decide how to do it. But this photographer obviously poses objects to photograph them, as opposed to my friend who looks out in the pasture or whatever. I just thought this had extraordinary composition. I loved the way the flowers were casually arranged and lying below the vase here, and it just had appeal because of that. This is a watercolor. This was done by Lynn Snow, who lives outside of Camden, Maine. And I saw some things she did in a gallery there when I was shopping around, and got her phone number and called her and asked to come out to her home where her studio is, and drove probably 15, 20 miles out in the country. She was setting up for her daughter's wedding the next day, so there was a big tent in the yard and tables set up with white tablecloths and people running around trying to get ready for this wedding. But she graciously let me look through what she had in the gallery, or in her studio there, and this was one thing I liked and bought. Those petunias just about look real. And this this is probably now close to 30 years old. This is a lithograph done by a fellow named Richard Volpe. And I believe, unfortunately I don't have good documentation on this, but I believe this was done on plexiglass. I'm not sure how one would do that. But it's a numbered and signed print. And the subject matter is, and color, is the reason why it appeared to me. Questions, anyone?
What phase are you in now?
What color phase? Well, you know, I'm really not. It's not as though I would go out and actually try to find, you know, and say, oh, I like purple or whatever. I'm of those categories Bob mentioned earlier, I'm an art lover, and I buy something that I don't know what I'll do with it, but I buy it because I like it. It doesn't have to go in my living room because it's coral or, you know, blue or green or whatever. So, just interest. Any other questions?
How price value is a print versus an oil painting or watercolor?
Well, interestingly enough, apparently oil paintings, of which I have none, and I personally do not like oil paintings. Oil paintings generally, I believe, are treasured and priced higher than prints, and one of the advantages of a print, whether it's a lithograph or it's an etching or an engraving, is that it's more affordable, generally more affordable. Other questions? Okay. Larry Kasanovich?
Good job.
Good evening, folks. Larry Kasanovich is my name, and antiques is my game. I think the two predecessors here have done a great job tonight in their presentations, and I hope I can do as well. When Bev and I talked about doing this, she said there were some things that obviously the folks would want to know about, for example, you know, why do you collect, and when did you start, and that kind of thing. And I must say that I started some years ago, and kind of in a quirky way, I think. I came home from college one time, and my father had just retired from United States Steel, and so he wouldn't go buggy. he started going to these little country auctions and antique fairs and things like that. And I came home, and he was sitting in the living room and said, come on out to the garage. I've got this great thing I want you to see. And, I wanted to please him, and I went out to the garage, and I looked at this piece, and I thought, I don't know. What is it? And he said, well, it's a secretary bookcase. Anybody can tell that. And it had the little glass door and a fold-down writing area with pigeonholes in it and a little mirror above it. And it was painted fire engine red with a green competition stripe on the edge. And I said, what is this stuff? And he said, this is not stuff, this is antiques. Well, as luck would have it, he stripped it all by hand. And then he polyurethaned it, and he sanded it, and he polyurethaned it, and he sanded it, and on and on and on. And today it sits upstairs in Maureen and I's bedroom as a great piece of memorabilia for me from him, and of which we will never sell. So that's kind of the way we started. I guess for us now, and most of you know who I am, we're in the McDonald's business, and it can be a pretty stressful kind of thing. It keeps us going night and day. And what we started to do is on Sundays, just to take little rides. And we'd go out to antique shops, or we'd go to an auction, and we'd look for things that we liked. And obviously, we purchased things that we liked. I guess, though, the businessman starts to come into my frame of mind when I do this, though, and I also like to think that the things I buy are going up in value. As my predecessors have indicated, though, in this case with antiques, there are no guarantees. And I unfortunately have made mistakes along the way. I really like Bev's pictures and lithographs and so forth, and she can pull out the letter of authenticity, because I can't do that. I can't give anybody here a letter of authenticity on the things that we have. I can tell you, though, that one of the enjoyments of going out and doing this is for me personally, is just stress relief. And going out, and as Maureen and I were talking about this late last night, finding a find. Going from one antique shop to the next, up in Vermont, to New Hampshire, through Maine, and not knowing from one to the next what you're going to see. And if you can find something that you can put into your collection, that's great. And that's what we do. So the find of the find, to me, is intriguing, and that's what we started off doing. Obviously, too, we have some favorites that we like to collect, and that we think are part of art. I don't know it's fine art, but we think it's artsy in and of itself. I've been a great fan of saw clay stoneware for the last 25 years. I've had some expert advice from people in the field that have guided me in the right direction over the years. Oftentimes, too, going along with the fact that there's no letter of authenticity, you don't know who the artist is either. These men were basically trained by others in the trade, and then they went off and they did their own thing with their type of artwork that they liked. This piece here is obviously a churn. It comes and it is stamped with the New York Stoneware Company. And the reason that I like it so much, and the reason that it's odd in terms of the stoneware, is because of the decoration. If you look closely at it, and we'll try to pull it up here, this man has used coloring to show where the sun is appearing and where it's shaded on the fruit. And it's taken a lot of time to do that. So obviously, whoever it was took a great deal of time and effort to do that in his own special way. I also take a lot of pride in the fact that all of these things that, as far as saw clay stoneware with cobalt decoration, are very utilitarian. They were used every day. And when you can find these that are in the condition that these are, it is unusual. Typically, there's dings, bangs, breaks, cracks, on and on and on. Although I will say that I try to buy things that are as perfect as I can find them. There are guys in the field that don't care if they don't have a handle, but if they've got a great lion, cobalt lion, or some sort of animal, or a face, that's all that matters to them. So, you know, it just determines on what you want to do. I also collect pictures, and the salt glaze pictures. The reason that I do that is based upon the fact that they were so utilitarian, they're used every day. It's very, very inoften that you can find them where everything is intact, and the cobalt is so vivid. This one comes from the Somerset Pottery Works out of New Jersey. Basically, the stoneware that I have in our collection ranges in age from 1790, roughly, until 1880, 1885, when a lot of this went by the board. They were all done by hand, turned by hand, and the artwork was done by hand. The picture on the far left is a picture that is not even marked, but based upon the fact of the potteries and the potters, it's known that that would have come from Pennsylvania. And a potter by the name of Remy, who is infamous in the pottery world, the stoneware world, had either his brother or a potter or someone in that realm made that picture. So we collect stoneware. We enjoy the artwork on it, and it's, I hope, appreciating in value as the years go on. The reason I have the small plate up there, and I wanted to mention this first, both Maureen and I are into collecting all kinds of things, but that piece was the very first piece that I picked up myself, and that was when I was 20, and I just liked the roses. I don't know why, and I looked on the back, and my mom said, you know, this is really pretty neat. It's called Haviland China. And I said, well, I don't know, I got it in Bloomington when I was down at college. I was going through an antique shop, and I said, you know, that looks pretty neat. And she said, well, how could it be Haviland? Haviland is usually real small roses and small flowers and things like that. And I started this up, and it's rather unusual, and we've continued that collection throughout all the years. So that's why I put that into the collection here tonight. A couple of the other things that we do, we like to collect spatterware, and that is the large bowl up here. This is probably what we call stick spatter, because of the fact that in these small circles right here, they were applied with a stick. On the end of it, there was another little item that they used to just stamp it before expiring. I don't know a lot about as much as certainly you do, but we like the colors. They're very vivid. Typically the cobalt blue, we try to get as vivid as we can. Also, we display everything. We display everything. We put everything out. And the kids, I must have close to 60 pieces of stoneware in and around the house. They have used it for just about everything imaginable throughout the years. And we've been real fortunate in the fact that very, very little has been, you know, destroyed by the boys. We display everything, and I'll never sell any of it in any of the collections that we've started, because we feel, again, to Bev's comment, which is really important with artwork, I think. We think it's near and dear to us because we can almost, I've kept a book, and we can go back in that book and say exactly where we bought the piece, whether it be in Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, and there's always a story. And we were sitting there, and as Bev was talking about the gal with the wedding, there's one dealer way up in upstate New Hampshire that we always stop to see, and we always happen to stay overnight because it turns into a long, long night. So, and it's really great for us because he's extremely knowledgeable, and when he looks at pieces, he can tell you whether it's right or wrong. And we've been stung, and he's been able to help us out with it. And he's been able to teach us a lot about what's right and wrong, particularly in stoneware, and early woodworking. Another piece of pottery that we have is the spatterware. And the spatterware there that's raised is a pitcher. The spatter is applied with a sponge. Spongeware, spatterware, spongeware, I guess that's what you want to call it. And this piece is a little bit different because it has the bird on it. And typically, in the trade, this is called, not spongeware, but peafowl. And it basically goes to what they would call the pheasant. And they lessen that down to peafowl, and it's hand done, hand painted, and just about every piece is different. And the pheasant has got different colors. They also have various patterns, various different decors. They've got a log house, they've got a cannon, they've got a schoolhouse. And every time I see those pieces, they become rare and they become more expensive because you just don't see them anymore. Also, the utilitarian pieces like this, I think, are the value of it is better and more because they had a tendency to get broken a little bit easier. Maureen is also a collector of antique quilts, and I've got one sitting there. I didn't really have a chance to get it raised. We can do that here in a second if you'll just bear with us. It's she collects quilts. We think they're great art. I mount them on walls in the house all over the place. We've got a great old house, and most of you know where I live, on the Moody Road, in the old Moody house. And so we've got a lot of walls, and we fill them up. This is in our minds a great Amish quilt. Maureen particularly likes them. I probably should let her talk about it, but we both enjoy the great dark vivid colors that the Amish women put into these things. And it's artwork in the fact that this is what they call the pattern of the Irish chain, and it's a sateen kind of fabric, and it, you know, the way you look at this, the farther you get it away, your eyes can start playing tricks with all these patterns inside of it. But the other factor is the great quilting that comes into play up here in the vine, and then when you turn it around and you look at the back, you see what tremendous work that the gals did when they did it. And a lot of folks, you know, you quilt your quilt, you know, whatever. You see a lot of lighter colors. We happen to like the vivid dark ones. And this quilt is signed, I believe, by the quilter, and I believe the date is in it 09, so it was probably 1909. Came out of a private collection of a man who put together the Amish collection for the state of Indiana. And it's just really it's a real vivid example of what the Amish people do, and we feel like the artwork in it is fantastic. Then we brought one more. If you'll bear with us for a moment, we'll wrap this piece up. So that as far as artwork goes, there's the color and there's the motif, but there's also the work in it that looks great. This one is one I think I bought for. I think I bought this one for you.
Wedding.
For winning. This is
It's called a wedding quilt.
wedding quilt, obviously.
But this shows more of the workmanship. This is strictly the stitching, which is all hand done.
No, this one came out of Kentucky.
How old is it?
That one, like I said, was 1909. This one, we think, was probably between 1880 and 1900, but there's no date on this one. But, you know, and again, the artwork and also the closeness of the stitch work is also, you know, a tale of how good the artist is. And this one is so
The closer
tight.
the stitches are per inch, they measure it, how many stitches per inch, and the closer, the more you can get in inches, the better seamstress or whatever you are.
Do you use that quilt?
Very
Not-
rarely.
Not with those boys.
Not this one, but most of, all the vets do have quilts on that we, have collected or whatever.
Again, just to go over some of these things again, we live with everything we buy. We put it out, except with that one. Usually I hang them on walls to keep them away from the guys. There are a couple more items that I did bring, and one of the things that Bev had indicated to me that we wanted to do was we wanted to talk about, it doesn't take a lot of money to collect. And I picked this Maureen calls it a paddle, I call it a fan, up at an auction, and it was, I think, 75 cents. But to me, I saw an old man sitting down under a big shady tree who picked up this piece of wood and began to carve with, and while he was talking to some of the good old boys, and turned it into a fan. And the way I see it is kind of a funny caricature of Abe Lincoln. That's the way I look at it. That's what I see it. So that's what attracted me to it. And it didn't cost a lot, but it's a great form, and it's a primitive artwork in the United States, in my opinion. The last piece that I brought is something I also try to collect as much as I can, and that's American eagles. I think they stand for strength. I always portray them to my boys, and I talk to them about being strong and being the eagles of not only a family, but also wherever they go in this life, whether it's school, sports, or wherever. And this is a fantastic carved piece that the man just took a tremendous amount of time to do. It's very intricate, and the workmanship is outstanding. The date on it is 1841.
So wood line, it's one of
Yes, it's a piece of wood, and obviously inset inside the piece of wood. A lot of times people we thought at first that this was a butter mold, but it's not. There was never a handle. And we've seen them, but not with this kind of work. This had to be associated with something else that we'll never know, where it went or how it went, in some sort of display. So that's what we have tonight, and we think they're, and they obviously, the prices range from just a little to what I consider a lot. We're awful proud of that, but it's the artwork that comes from within, and what we enjoy to collect. And so that's what we've got. And does anybody have any questions? Glad to field anything anybody has.
Do you have other pieces of that happen in that pattern?
About 70.
Wow. What all?
Cups and saucers.
All bought one at a time.
Yeah, and all bought one at a
Yeah.
time. At various auctions. When we get the Tri-State Trader, it's a antique weekly magazine, and we'll look in there and she'll say, look, there's 2 pieces of drop rose, and God knows where Ohio.
I went to Indianapolis one night. It was a midnight auction. And I drove down all the way to Indianapolis, and of course it's got to be the last.
It's like 4 o'clock in the morning.
And I'm sitting out,
Always
I'm
is.
calling him and saying, "Do you really want me to be here?" And the thing was, once they got to it, because most of them we've just bought, and there would just be one piece, and I think we've gotten them at fairly reasonable prices. When these came up and they advertised it as drop rose, there's whatever collectors from all around came to it, and they went for extremely high prices. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I sat here all this time and I said, I am not going to spend this money. But the funny thing was, when I left there and didn't buy, I got like a chip piece because it went down, way down in value, and I said, he's going to kill me if I went all the way down there and do anything. But on the way back,
I stopped in Delphi and Brookston, just as at some shops or whatever in there. I got 4 pieces for like a third of the cost of what they just went at this auction. And all of a sudden it was, I don't know what, and we very rarely see them. So it was just kind of my lucky day. But,
Cups, saucers, serving plates, the whole thing, the big servers, butter pats, anything and everything. We just picked up one at a time. But we like it. It's very visual.
Can you find someone to clean your hooks?
That is a chore. My mom does those.
Does she hire out?
And mom sometimes, as luck would have it, screws up too. Thank God she's not here, because she does that as a favor to us. And she just does everything. She just takes her time and does them by hand, and most of the time, I don't like to wash them. Typically, we try to change them out. If they've been on the wall for over 3 months, we take them down and rest them, put them in the dark, put them in pillowcases, and put them away. And then we try to rotate them out throughout the house. But no, it's difficult. It's been an enjoyment. I appreciate the fact of having a chance to be here with you all tonight. It's always fun showing the things that you love and you have near at hand all the time. Bev and Bob, too, have done a great job, and I really appreciate being up here tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, you've seen some pottery, some art pottery, and some studio pottery, and some wonderful folk art, Larry. That's really nice things there. There's some paintings, some prints. You've had kind of a broad spectrum of what at least the 3 of us try to work on, try to collect. We've all had a lot of the same experiences and similar experiences in tracking some of these things down. The one thing that I might mention, and I guess we've got about 2 or 3 minutes yet, Father Stang in his book up there about, in the chapter he has on collecting, talks about one thing that we didn't really touch on tonight, and that's what he calls the morality of collecting. With what you see here tonight and what we collect, that's really not a problem. But for what he has, where he's actually collecting pieces of a culture, or if you were collecting American Indian artifacts or something like that, that might be something that you'd want to think about. Do you really want to collect some of that kind of thing, and if so, what, and in what form, and what do you want to do with it? But fortunately for the things that we have, the kind of things that we have here and the kind of things that we collect, that's really not a problem. Anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. Jim, I guess that's it.
I'd just like to remind everyone to turn in your notes